Welcome back to another video. Tonight we've got Ian again with us. How are you going tonight, Ian?
Fine, thanks. Bit
You're
cool.
not feeling the cold?
It's pretty cool.
Tonight we're going to talk about some more. We like talking about BYD and Chinese cars and how they're gonna disrupt the car market as we know it. So this is the year that BYD have actually been serious about taking on markets, and they seem to have picked a lot of countries all over the world, not just one region, but all over the world. And the one we want to talk about tonight is probably could be the most important one for them, and that's the EU. And am I right in saying that EU, that's the third biggest car market in the world, or the second, Ian?
It's the second biggest EV market in the world.
Second biggest EV market. Okay, and that leads us on to the next question. BYD, what cars? So they've got the choice of selling battery EVs in Europe or plug-in hybrid EVs in Europe, and I'm not sure which way they want to go, because in China they sell it's about 50-50 battery EVs to plug-in hybrids. Would that be right?
It swung back and forth. It swung in favor. It was in favor of EVs, but this year they seem to be targeting more growth in PHEVs than EVs.
Okay, so Ian, what's the history of car manufacturing in China from, say, the last 20 or 30 years? How has that worked for car manufacturers outside of China?
Well, they set up, it goes back, I think, even further than 30 years, but they set up, and the original companies to come in were US companies. But China and most of the world at the time had very strict trade tariffs. Australia had huge trade tariffs to protect local manufacturing. And China set up that to manufacture cars in China, you had to set up a 50-50 joint venture with a Chinese partner company. And if you didn't do that, you got prohibitive tariffs on your cars. So the end result was that whilst everything other than cars, China became the factory for the world. So washing machines, fridges, computers, it was all made in China. But companies just got it made in China and then shipped it everywhere. But the cars that were set up to be made in China were all half owned by the Chinese. So no one really wanted to export them in a big scale. And this rule held until 2019, I think was the correct year, when they first relaxed it for EVs and you no longer needed a joint venture. And then in 2021, they expanded it to cars in general. So no longer does this joint venture rule apply, but all the joint ventures are all set up, and VW has moved the dial and gone beyond the 50% with its joint venture, but no one's really shut them down and sort of rewritten the rules now that things are different. So the end result is that we have all these cars from China that are Chinese branded cars. Instead of with fridges and everything else, it just wears the brand of whoever owns the thing, and just the factories outsourced to China. We actually get the cars. So that's the first step. And now that the cars are actually coming, whereas for years, we only got the odd BMW or something that was made in China, but it wasn't done on scale. Now there's a threat of them coming on scale with EVs, where the Chinese EVs are leading. The US responded by moving its tariffs from 25% to 100% on EVs from China. Well, vehicles from China, not just EVs. That change happened in May. Then the EU has given a ruling that it's about to introduce tariffs on Chinese EVs. Now, Norway won't apply the same tariffs, and the UK is not planning to maintain the same tariffs. But there's already a 10% tariff on vehicles from outside the EU. Mm-hmm. And the idea is it's to increase by 17.4% for BYD vehicles, 20% for Geely vehicles, 38.1% for SAIC, as in MG, etc.
Ooh, that's going to hurt them.
That's going to hurt them. Now, there was a whole bunch of brands. I didn't put the list up here, but there's a whole bunch of brands who all participated in the study, and all the rest of the brands get 21%, and anyone who didn't participate gets 38%.
Yeah. So probably in the case of BYD, so they're 21%, they're 17.4%. Just is that apply to plug-in hybrids as well as battery EVs, or is it?
No, plug-in hybrids are totally exempt from this. They still have the 10% that applies on all vehicles, but this extra percentage doesn't apply. Since then, by the way, Turkey's announced that it's going to put 40% on all EVs from China. And just for interesting sake, for EU vehicles that go to China, there's a 15% tariff at the moment if they're built in. So it's down to 15% for vehicles built outside China, but they're proposing to move it to 25% in retaliation for at least for large vehicles with over 2-litre engines. And note that this is not locked in yet. Germany's put in an 11th hour bid to avert a trade war because Germany apparently doesn't like the idea, maybe because German car makers are really big in China and they're worried about what will happen to their sales. Because it is the world's biggest car market. So even if they only get half the profits, it's still a lot of their profits.
Yeah, because I was surprised that Germany, you'd think they'd want to protect their manufacturing industry, but in actual fact, they're going to hurt their manufacturing industry if they get tariffs put on their cars in China. So that's surprising.
And BMW and Mercedes particularly are well advanced with EVs. They don't seem to need the protection as much, and they're in a niche where they're less threatened by Chinese. VW is an interesting one, but then it's got a big partner with Xiaopeng or Xpeng that seems to mean that they need the cooperation with China. So all in all, they need it. The French vehicles are pretty much nowhere in China, so they don't worry about losing sales. And France, with its dealing with the right wing and appeasing the right wing at the moment, seems to be the main push behind these tariffs, or the strongest push behind these tariffs. Obviously, Italy is another country affected with their brands because Stellantis spans both France and Italy, and it's pretty big.
Right. So BYD, so we got 17.4% tariff on battery EVs, but only 10% tariff on plug-in hybrids.
Well, it's 10% plus another 17% on battery ones. So it's 27% in total, assuming it's not cumulative, so that it's not really even more than that, because it's 10% and then 17.4%, I think, on the amount, maybe once the 10% has already been added.
Yeah. So where I want to go with this is I believe that if BYD are probably going to concentrate on plug-in hybrids for Europe because they get taxed less and there's more profit to be made. That's the assumption. They 7% difference. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, they've had this 17% difference.
17. Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah. No, it's 10% on everything. Then it's an additional 17%.
Right. Yes, right.
So it's not just 17% tariff. It's at least 27%, 30%, and 48%.
Yeah, look, I can't.
Because maybe you start with $100, you add 10 to have 110, and then you add 17% of the 110. I'm not sure on that one, but it could be.
Yeah, so it's pretty clear that BYD probably aren't going to concentrate on battery EVs in Europe because the taxes are so high. So I think they're going to just try and concentrate on plug-in hybrids for Europe. And what's that going to do for
Well, I mean, it's an interesting one where it's going to go. So one of the things to understand is that the EU looked at it, and they've set the tariffs on the basis of the amount of assistance these companies have got from the government. So that
Yes.
shows that BYD has had less subsidy grants effectively from the government than, for example, SAIC, which is actually government owned anyway.
Mm.
And Geely's below average, and the average is 21% of those studied. So, and BYD's already set their prices high in Europe and higher than other brands that also come from China. So
Yeah.
they may have already allowed for as much as 17.4%. It may even be lower than they expected.
Yeah, so what I'm trying to understand is that I think as a company, BYD are not going to concentrate on battery EVs in Europe. I think they're going to go for the lower tax system.
Well, that makes sense. And it could be that they expected all vehicles to be affected. And Europe is one of the markets where they would have expected to sell battery EVs in higher ratio to PHEVs. And their PHEVs are, they're EV-based PHEVs, which is not something Europe has seen before, because even though Japan has had the Mitsubishi Outlander, which is an EV-based PHEV, and the US has had General Motors EV-based PHEVs. The original Volt was basically effectively, these are all range extender vehicles where they drive as an EV, and the main role of the ICE is to just give them more range. And all of those vehicles do that, whereas in Europe, that's not what PHEVs have been. They've been just power-boosted ICE vehicles.
Yeah,
They're not very economical. And in fact, they tended to qualify for company tax deductions, which meant that they were mostly bought by people on corporate leases. And BYD, for example, sells a version of the C-Line in Europe with a larger battery and specific configuration to qualify for the highest tax deduction. And you get these tax deductions, and then the people who buy the car have all their fuel covered in their lease agreement. So if they charge, it comes off their own electricity bill, but if they fill up at the pump, it's no additional cost to them. So they don't don't charge their PHEVs. Anyway.
Yeah, hopefully that won't continue, but that was a bit of a failure in the execution of the tax incentives. But I think
failure of the vehicles in Europe because they're not advanced enough in their PHEV architecture, so they don't deliver the cost advantages. I mean, BYD scrapped making regular ICE vehicles because they found in China they could produce their PHEVs for less than the cost of an equivalent pure ICE vehicle.
Right. Yeah.
So that's where they're at, that they can compete with PHEVs. They're not after targeting the PHEV market. They're after targeting the car market because they're the cheapest non-EVs they can make.
Right. So we can expect to see a lot of plug-in hybrids going to Europe. Do you think now the Europeans will change their? Well, will they plug in at night time now, or do you think that they'll just try and run these cars on petrol?
Well, even if you run them on petrol, I mean, they're more efficient than regular hybrids, even if they're run on petrol.
Yeah.
And they are priced generally to compete, if not with regular hybrids, in some cases with even non-hybrids, which are always run on petrol. So they don't actually rely on the savings from running on electricity to be competitive.
Yeah.
So they could sell in big numbers. I mean, as BYD is hitting the world with PHEVs, it's not about hitting a specific market niche of PHEVs. It's hitting the mainstream. I mean, the C-Line 6 is after the RAV4 more than the Outlander.
Yeah, because when I notice, because the price of fuel in Europe is higher than what we pay in Australia, so the cars tend to have smaller engines. They tend to be diesel because the diesel seems to get a better mileage. So if these cars get better than diesel cars, will that be the case? Or they're very close to diesel. Do you think it's going to give a better range than diesel?
They'll give at least the range of diesel. Yes.
Yep. All right. I'm kind of disappointed that the Europeans went that way, because I want to see more battery EVs on the road, or less hybrids. But I guess it's a stepping stone. It's in the right direction. So hopefully Australia doesn't decide to do the same thing.
In Australia, we're still buying, 90% of new vehicles are still ICE vehicles. So,
right.
I mean, if people who are buying ICE vehicles buy plug-in hybrids instead of ICE vehicles, then that's a big move. Now, some of them will charge, some of them won't charge, but they're still more economical than a regular hybrid, and they create more of a market for providing for charging at home. And that's the biggest barrier in Australia that I can see, is that about only 50% of the cars are parked in places where you can charge these days. There's a lot parked on the street. There's a lot parked in apartments with no charging. And if you could just get, and in the end, in city driving, a plug-in hybrid has the potential to do just as much time on electricity as a full EV does.
Yeah.
That's the potential. Just doesn't mean it will happen.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how BYD is going to go in Europe, because I don't know. I think I find the Europeans are sort of not so welcoming of new brands. And I think in Australia we're prepared to give the new guy a go. But do you think in Europe BYD is going to be a big name? I see that they advertise, they're actually promoting the soccer in Europe. I see the actual billboard BYD, which is the first time I've actually seen BYD advertising in a soccer match.
Yeah, it's being branded with football matches, and I don't know. I think the Europeans sometimes are mostly. I mean, they're not all homogenous. They vary. There's very brand conscious people, but there's a lot that aren't brand conscious. America overall is more brand conscious.
Yeah.
I mean, you take countries like Spain and Italy, they almost don't buy iPhones, which is the biggest brand in phones.
Okay. Yeah.
Whereas Americans, it is an American brand as well.
Yeah.
But Europe is brand oriented in their phones, and they buy Chinese phones in Europe.
Well, there you go. That's a good sign that things can happen. So if they're prepared to buy Chinese phones, I think they're probably prepared to buy Chinese cars. And
I see reviews in Australia, and they sort of almost apply a confirmation bias to Chinese cars, that even the ones that are as well built as German brands, they tend to assume they're not. Whereas when you read the German reviews, they say, "Oh no, this is built. This is not like most European products. This is built to definitely the equivalent of German standards when the cars are." I mean, not all Chinese cars are built to those standards, but
correct.
Particularly BYD ones are very high quality builds, even if they're not the most specced out cars.
Yeah, because I did spend some time in Korea just last Christmas, and speaking to Koreans about Chinese cars, and they absolutely hate anything from China. Just saying, they hate it with a passion. So
you get that attitude, but I mean, if you sit in a C-Line 6 or a Seal, and then you get into a Kia EV6, you'll notice there's a step back in build quality in the Kia.
Yeah.
Now, the Kia EV9 is a different thing. It's, you open and shut the door and it sounds more like a BYD, but not with the Kia EV6.
Wow. I haven't actually been into a Kia EV6, but they're actually in my carpool at work, so I want to go for a drive, but I keep on missing out. So, yeah. But, all right. All right. So probably not the news that we wanted to hear about Europe. So they seem to be they'll be supporting, or they're more encouraging plug-in hybrid cars from manufacturers. So
they're not attempting to do that. And I mean, remember, it's just cars. I mean, the rule doesn't apply to Chinese cars that are not EVs at all. It's not just the plug-in hybrids that are exempt. It's just that the BYD vision of a non-EV is a plug-in hybrid. That's how they make ICE cars effectively.
They
make them as plug-in hybrids. Whereas MGs, they're still going to sell in big numbers as petrol cars.
Right. Yeah.
So it's not particularly pushing people into plug-in hybrids, but for BYD, that's the same thing. Plug-in hybrid is petrol car.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Because I was kind of thinking that, we might, in Australia, we love our battery EV cars. So I was kind of, and Norway does as well. So I was thinking maybe the rest of Europe would be going that way, but it seems from what we know.
Sweden's part of the EU. They're not that far behind Norway.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I just don't see it happening, like with the tariff protection. Like if you're given a choice between the plug-in hybrid and the battery car, and the plug-in hybrid may be a couple of €1,000 cheaper than a full battery car, then I think probably a lot of people are going to choose the hybrid instead.
Well, or just regular petrol car. Remember that BYD is the only brand that is pushed towards plug-in hybrids. Every other brand is pushed towards whatever they sell that's not an EV.
Right. Yeah.
So it hurts the EV-only brands particularly.
Yeah.
But Geely, for example, they sell lots of cars. So it'll push it to whatever ICE version they have. And, Geely plug-in hybrids are pretty rubbish generally. But their ICE versions are still competitive.
Yeah.
But then Volvo is dropping everything but EVs.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
But they're getting them made in factories in Europe as well.
Yeah. So
that's the thing, right? BYD's opening a factory in Hungary. So probably they'll only make EVs there, and
yes, no tariffs.
And the EVs will then be cheaper than the plug-in hybrids.
Yeah, because that's the key to these tariff wars, is to actually manufacture in the EU, which will be Hungary. So so there is a future there for EVs, and probably BYD are going to be sending so many EVs everywhere else in the world. They probably would like to have a factory in Hungary, so they don't have to pay all the shipping costs from China. So who knows?
Yeah, I don't think the shipping costs are that high, but it'll certainly help. So I mean, looking at the world map there, it's basically Canada and the US and Europe off limits to Chinese EVs. So where are they going to go? They're going to go everywhere else.
Yeah, no worries. All right, well, that sort of ends our topic tonight. So I hope that's given some people some input as to what's going to happen in Europe with the BYD and other Chinese manufacturers in Europe. They seem to want to push into Europe, but I can't see that happening unless they actually build the cars in Europe, because I don't know if they're able to get the prices down enough to sell a lot of cars like they do in Australia or other parts of the world. So thank you very much, Ian, for being on tonight, and I'll see you in the next video, and see you all in the next video. Thanks for watching.